They tried to take away my daughter's horse, claimed she was breaking HOA rules. But what they didn't know, her quiet, widowed father was about to be sworn in as the new mayor. And when the police showed up at our door, that's when everything changed. For 3 years, our quiet neighborhood had echoed with nothing louder than the soft clop-clop of Thunder's hooves during my morning rides. My horse, my best friend, was more than just an animal. He was a living connection to my late mother, the one who first taught me to ride when I was just a child. Ever since we moved into Willow Creek Estates, these early rides were our ritual, a way to start the day with grace, with peace. That morning was no different, until it was. The sun was just peeking over the rooftops, casting golden light across the dewy lawns, when the screech of a screen door shattered the calm. Mrs. Diane Walsh, in a pink bathrobe and curlers, came stomping down her steps like a woman on a mission. She pointed a trembling, accusatory finger straight at us. "You stop right there. That filthy animal doesn't belong on our streets." I gently reined Thunder to a halt, his ears twitching, more confused than startled. "Good morning, Mrs. Walsh," I said with the brightest smile I could muster. "Beautiful day for a ride, isn't it?" But Mrs. Walsh wasn't in the mood for pleasantries. "Look what that beast is doing to our roads. Hoof marks. Do you know how much we pay for maintenance in this neighborhood?" Her voice was sharp, shrill, full of the kind of entitled outrage that only ever gets louder the more it's ignored. I glanced down. The road beneath Thunder's hooves looked pristine, the same as it had every day before. "The road looks fine to me," I replied gently. "And this is a public road, not private HOA property." "Wrong move." "You don't get smart with me," she barked. "We have rules. This isn't some farm." By now, a few neighbors had stepped out to see what the fuss was about. Some looked concerned. Mr. Rodriguez gave me a discreet thumbs up behind her back. I was trembling inside, but I stood tall. "Thunder isn't livestock," I explained calmly. "He's a registered riding companion. And I checked with the city before we ever moved in. Horses are allowed on public roads." Mrs. Walsh didn't care. She yanked her phone from her robe pocket, barking into the receiver. "Harold, it's Diane. That Miller girl is parading that horse again. We need to do something." I rode away quietly, heart pounding, not realizing I'd just kicked a hornet's nest. What began as one woman's overreaction would soon spiral into a neighborhood crisis, an HOA power trip, and a police visit to our front door. But they had no idea what was coming next because my quiet father wasn't just reading the paper at City Hall, he was about to be sworn in as the new mayor. The day after Mrs. Walsh's tantrum, I found a cream-colored envelope wedged into our screen door, bold red letters screaming, "Violation Notice." My stomach dropped. I tore it open and read the words that would launch our family into a legal nightmare. "It has come to the attention of the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association that you are in violation of Covenant 7.4.2. No livestock shall be kept on any lot. You have 48 hours to remove said animal or face a $500 fine with additional $100 daily penalties." They were calling Thunder, my horse, my friend, my connection to my late mother, livestock. I reached for my phone, heart pounding, and called Dad, straight to voicemail. I left a shaky message. "They're trying to take Thunder away, Dad. Please call me back. I don't know what to do." I tried to hold it together as I left for school, but waiting at the bus stop across the street stood Mrs. Walsh, smirking. Right beside her was Mr. Perkins, the HOA president, looking proud of himself like he'd just won a chess match. "You and your little pony show are over," she called out. "This is a neighborhood, not a barnyard." I walked past them, eyes forward, but inside I was burning. They were treating me like I was a criminal, like Thunder was trash they needed to get rid of. That ride through the neighborhood, that was our morning ritual. It was healing, harmless, legal. That evening things got worse. Zoe texted, "Check the neighborhood Facebook page, now." Mrs. Walsh had posted a blurry photo of Thunder and me riding past her house. The caption, "Health hazard in our neighborhood, livestock defecating on our roads, property values in decline, children at risk, urgent HOA meeting tonight." The comments were a battlefield. Some neighbors chimed in, "My daughter has allergies. This isn't a farm. Report them to animal control." But not everyone sided with her. "That girl takes great care of her horse. They got permits for that stable, I remember. It's a public road, not HOA property." Still, I felt surrounded, accused, alone. Until I remembered something. Dad had kept every permit, survey, and legal doc in his office. I raced there, digging through folders until I found it, the golden ticket. Covenant 7.4.2, the one they quoted? Dad had written a note next to it. Horses exempt. City Ordinance 14.3 supersedes HOA rules. Confirmed by City Attorney, May 15, 2021. I held the paper like it was a lifeline. The HOA didn't have a legal leg to stand on. Then I saw the headlights through the window. Cars pulling into the Perkins driveway. The emergency meeting was starting. I shoved the documents in my backpack and marched across the street. I wasn't going to let them talk about my future, Thunder's future, without me there. Mrs. Perkins opened the door, surprised to see me. Ellie, this is a homeowners-only meeting. My father owns our home, I said calmly. He's not here. I'm representing our family. Mr. Rodriguez, bless him, stepped in. She has every right to be here. I walked into a room full of stares and folded arms, but I didn't back down. They tried to shut me up, but I stood firm and held up that document. Our stable was legally permitted. Your own committee approved it. The city allows horses on public roads. Thunder is protected by law. You could hear a pin drop. That night, I didn't just defend my horse. I challenged the entire HOA, and for the first time, they blinked first. The next morning, I woke up to find our quiet corner of Willow Creek Estates had become the center of a digital storm. The video Zoe and I posted, explaining the truth about Thunder, our city permits, and how the HOA was overstepping their bounds, had already gained traction. Dozens of shares, a thread of comments longer than anything I'd ever posted. And the split was clear. Our community was divided. Some people cheered me on. Finally, someone standing up to Walsh and Perkins. My grandkids love watching that horse go by. Don't let them take him. She's got guts. But others weren't so kind. This isn't the Wild West. Rules are rules, no exceptions. She's just trying to stir up trouble for attention. I tried not to take it personally, but it was hard not to. These were my neighbors, people who once waved to Thunder and me, who had handed out candy on Halloween and complimented my mom's garden, and now they were treating me like I was a nuisance. Dad still hadn't made it home. His work at City Hall had been non-stop lately. He texted me that morning, just 3 words. Don't worry, working. But I did worry. Not just about the HOA fines or Thunder's future, but about what kind of community we really lived in. Later that day, Zoe and I got to work. If we were going to push back, we needed more than passion. We needed proof. Legal, documented, undeniable proof. We spread out papers across our kitchen table, city maps showing our streets were public. The permit for Thunder's stable signed by the city and the HOA Architectural Committee. Dad's handwritten notes in the HOA covenants pointing to city ordinances that overruled them. We started building a binder labeled simply, Thunder, Evidence. But that wasn't enough. We needed to understand the community we were up against. So we started gathering testimonies, quiet conversations with people we trusted. Mr. Finley, the retired lawyer at the corner house, offered his support. I read the HOA's letter. They're bluffing, he said. You ever need help with wording a response? Come to me, Mrs. Jackson, a neighbor who'd been around longer than almost anyone, said, people used to ride horses through these roads all the time, before folks like Walsh moved in and started making up their own rules. She showed us old photos, black and white snapshots of horse-drawn wagons on the very same streets they now claimed were too pristine for hoofprints. And then there was the silent majority, people who didn't speak up online, who didn't pick a side publicly, but who quietly offered nods of support or left kind comments under our video like, thank you for speaking up. We're watching, and we're listening. The divide was there, but so was the undercurrent of unity. We created flyers with summaries of the city laws and copies of our permits and passed them to a few trusted neighbors. Not to stir drama, but to provide the truth, the facts the HOA had conveniently ignored. One evening, as the sun dipped low over our quiet street, a knock came at the door. It was Mr. Rodriguez, the neighbor who had supported me at the first HOA meeting. I thought you should know, he said, glancing over his shoulder. There's another HOA meeting coming up, not just the board. This one's for all homeowners. He handed me a paper, an official-looking flyer from the HOA. Town hall discussion, community standards, and livestock violations. It was clear, the HOA was escalating things further. Now they were bringing the whole neighborhood in, hoping to isolate me, to pressure my family publicly. But instead of fear, I felt something new. Readiness. I turned back to our kitchen table, now covered with files, photos, maps, and highlighted printouts. It looked more like a courtroom prep room than a home. Let them come, I whispered. because the next time they tried to use the rules against me, I'd show them I knew the rules better than they did. The night of the emergency HOA meeting, the neighborhood shimmered with porch lights and tension. Cars lined the streets like it was a block party, but instead of folding chairs and lemonade, there were stiff suits and clutched folders. Mr. Perkins' grand colonial house was already packed when I stepped outside, file in hand and heart pounding in my chest. Zoe stood beside me, eyes wide. "You sure about this?" I nodded. "If they're going to talk about thunder, they're going to hear from me too." I crossed the street, boots firm on the sidewalk, and rang the doorbell. Mrs. Perkins answered, her lips pinched in surprise. "Ellie, this meeting is for homeowners." "My dad owns our home," I said calmly, holding her gaze. "I'm representing our family." Before she could object, Mr. Rodriguez appeared behind her. "Let the girl in, Barbara. She deserves a voice." Inside, folding chairs faced a podium, where Mr. Perkins stood gripping a binder like it held divine law. Neighbors filled every seat, some watching me curiously, others pointedly avoiding eye contact. Mrs. Walsh, perched in the front row, glared like I'd tracked manure onto her marble floors. "Eleanor Miller," Mr. Perkins said with a forced smile, "we were just discussing your unique situation." "His name is Thunder," I replied, stepping forward, "and I'd like to share some facts." Mrs. Walsh shot up. "This is outrageous. She's not even—" "Let her speak," Mr. Rodriguez interrupted, his voice steady. A few heads nodded in agreement. I opened my folder and lifted the highlighted documents. The HOA notice we received claims we're violating Covenant 7.4.2, but Willow Creek falls under City Ordinance 14.3, which allows horses on residential properties that meet specific conditions, which ours does. Our stable was approved by both the city and the HOA's architectural committee 2 years ago. I held up the signed permit for everyone to see. We followed every rule. A murmur rippled through the room. "And riding thunder on public roads?" I continued, voice gaining strength. "That's legal too. The roads in this neighborhood are city-maintained, not HOA property. City taxes pay for them, not HOA dues." Mr. Perkins shifted behind his podium. "Even if that's true, we're concerned about safety and property values." "Thunder has never hurt anyone," I said, meeting Mrs. Walsh's furious eyes. "I ride early, I clean up after him, and I follow traffic laws. This isn't about safety, it's about control." Mrs. Walsh jumped up again. "This is a community, not a ranch." "And what kind of community punishes a teenager for riding her horse?" came a voice from the back. It was Mrs. Jackson, arms crossed, voice sharp. "That horse brings joy to half the neighborhood." Before the argument could swell, the front door opened again. And there he was, my dad, still in his work clothes, holding a thick folder and flanked by a woman in a blazer I didn't recognize. "Sorry I'm late," he said, walking straight toward the front. "But I heard this meeting involved my daughter and my property." Mrs. Walsh blinked in shock. "James, we were just discussing—" "My attorney will join us," Dad said, motioning to the woman beside him. "Jennifer Wilson, city attorney." The room fell completely silent. Mr. Perkins recovered first. "What exactly are you trying to do, James?" "Clarify the law," Dad replied coolly. "These roads are public. The covenants you're citing are outdated and don't override city ordinances." Jennifer stepped forward, holding up her portfolio. "City Ordinance 14.3 explicitly permits horseback riding on public roads, and I've confirmed that the Millers' property complies with all city and county regulations." Mrs. Walsh looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. "So, what are you saying?" Dad turned to the crowd. "I'm saying this isn't about a horse. It's about misusing power, about an HOA trying to push someone out for no good reason." Someone in the crowd clapped, then another, and another. Mrs. Perkins stood. "I think we've heard enough." "Agreed," Mr. Rodriguez said. "Let the Millers be." Mrs. Walsh stormed out, heels clicking furiously against the hardwood. As the meeting dispersed, neighbors approached me quietly, some embarrassed, some supportive. Zoe gave me a squeeze on the shoulder. Dad just smiled. "You did good, kid." And for the first time in days, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we'd turned a corner. The morning after the HOA meeting felt like the calm before a storm. I was still riding the adrenaline from standing up for Thunder, still clinging to hope that the truth would carry weight. But when I opened the neighborhood Facebook page, my heart sank. Mr. Perkins had posted a long statement accusing my father of using improper political connections to pressure the HOA and bypass the rules. Mrs. Walsh chimed in with comments about protecting the neighborhood from lawless behavior. Worse, a few neighbors were siding with them. I stormed downstairs, phone in hand, ready to show Dad, but he was already at the kitchen table sipping coffee like nothing had happened. "You've seen this?" I asked, voice shaking with frustration. He nodded. "Yep. And you're just sitting there?" He raised an eyebrow and set down his mug. "Get your boots on." "What?" "And bring Thunder's favorite brush." 30 minutes later, we were riding side by side through the neighborhood, me on Thunder, Dad on an old bay gelding borrowed from Mr. Finley. I hadn't seen him ride in years, but he sat tall in the saddle, calm and collected. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains. Some came outside. Phones pointed in our direction. A few offered waves. Most just watched. "Mayor Mitchell?" called Mrs. Jenkins from her porch. "Is it true what they're saying online?" Dad slowed his horse and turned to her with a smile. "Depends what part. If it's the part about me knowing the law better than Mr. Perkins, then yes, it's true." A small ripple of laughter traveled down the street. When we reached the park, it was already buzzing. A news van idled near the entrance. Mr. Perkins stood on a bench surrounded by supporters, mostly familiar faces from the HOA board. And of course, right at his side was Mrs. Walsh, arms folded, expression sharp as a hawk. "Here comes the mayor who thinks the rules don't apply," Mr. Perkins boomed, pointing at us. Dad dismounted calmly and handed the reins to me. He walked forward, confident and unbothered, carrying a thick manila folder. People parted for him like Moses at the Red Sea. "I think laws matter very much, Robert," Dad said, voice carrying clearly. "That's why I've spent the last 6 months researching which ones actually apply to our community." He placed the folder on a picnic table and opened it. "This is the original land survey for Willow Creek Estates," he announced. "These roads marked in blue, public bridleways, established in 1892, and they are still public to this day." Murmurs swept through the crowd. He pulled out a second document. "This is a legal opinion from the city attorney confirming the HOA has no jurisdiction over these roads." A woman in a professional blazer stepped forward. "Jennifer Ramirez, city attorney," she said, addressing the crowd. "I reviewed your HOA bylaws. 17 provisions conflict with municipal code or residents' rights." Mr. Perkins stammered. "This is an ambush." "It's accountability," Dad replied coolly. Mrs. Walsh looked ready to erupt. "You set this all up." "No," Dad said, holding up one last document. "You did, when you called the police on a teenager riding her horse legally through her own neighborhood." People gasped. Whispers turned into full conversation. "But it's not just about Thunder," Dad continued. "It's about whether this neighborhood is going to be run by threats and fines or by fairness and facts." For a moment, nobody moved. Then slowly, applause began. From the back. From Mr. Rodriguez. From Mrs. Jackson. From the quiet folks who'd been watching all along. Even some of the board members clapped. Then came the moment that knocked the wind out of me. One of the reporters stepped forward. "Mayor Mitchell, when exactly did you assume office?" Dad smiled slightly. "As of yesterday afternoon, sworn in at 3 p.m. by Judge Renner." You could have heard a pin drop. Mrs. Walsh's face blanched. Mr. Perkins' mouth opened and closed like a guppy. You became mayor?" I whispered. "For a lot of reasons," Dad said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "But making sure people like you, people who stand for what's right, aren't silenced, that was at the top of the list." And in that moment, standing next to my father in the heart of the neighborhood that once turned against us, I felt something stronger than victory. I felt hope. In the days following Dad's unexpected reveal as mayor, the neighborhood felt different. The air had changed. People who once stayed silent now made eye contact. Some waved. Others knocked gently on our door, offering support or quiet apologies. It was as if our small act of standing up, against overreach, against intimidation, had cracked something wide open. For the first time in years, the community of Willow Creek began to wake up. On the front porch one morning, Mrs. Jackson from 3 houses down brought a warm pie and a story. "You know," she said, carefully smoothing the foil over the dish, "they fined me for having wind chimes last spring. Said it violated noise regulations. I didn't fight it. I figured I'd just take them down. But now I wish I had." More stories followed. A retired couple down the street had received notices for planting non-regulation shrubs. Another neighbor was charged $600 for a backyard swing set not approved by the HOA committee. One woman admitted through tears that she'd considered moving because she no longer felt welcome in the place she'd called home for 2 decades. All of these people, once isolated by fear or shame, now found strength in shared experience. It started small. A quiet gathering in our backyard. Dad called it a listening circle, but really it was therapy with folding chairs and lemonade. Eleanor, our longtime neighbor, stood and read aloud her HOA violation letter, crumpled from years in a drawer. They made me tear out the garden my late husband helped build, said it wasn't part of the landscape vision. I cried all week, but I didn't know who to tell. This time, she didn't cry alone. Marcus, a retired accountant, offered to look over HOA financial records. "Something's off," he said. "Funds are disappearing and the board won't answer my emails." Dad nodded. "Let's get organized. If we want change, we can't just tell stories. We need documentation, action." And we did. Over the course of a week, our living room became command central. Laptops, clipboards, and city ordinance binders stacked high. My friend Zoe took over communication, drafting polite yet pointed letters to local council members. A few high schoolers offered to help digitize documents. Mr. Finley, the neighborhood's oldest resident, shared stories of the original HOA charter, back when it truly was about community, not control. What began as one teenager defending her horse had now grown into a movement. People brought over photographs, receipts, old newsletters, anything that showed the pattern. Rachel, the former HOA secretary, stepped forward with meeting transcripts she'd quietly saved. "They changed rules without votes," she whispered. "Raised fees in closed sessions. I never spoke up, but maybe it's time I do." Dad created committees, legal research, HOA bylaw review, neighborhood outreach. No one was left out. Everyone had a role. And that Saturday morning, as the sun peeked through willow trees, our neighborhood felt more united than it had in years. We didn't know exactly where it would lead, but we did know this: we weren't afraid anymore. Not of Mrs. Walsh's sharp tongue, not of Mr. Perkins' binders, not of retaliation. That power only worked when we stood apart. Now, we stood together. The HOA had once wielded silence like a sword, but now, our voices, soft, stubborn, and full of purpose, had become the loudest thing in Willow Creek. It wasn't the courtroom that ended the war. It wasn't the legal files or the viral video or even the title of mayor. It was a little girl with bright eyes and an open heart. 3 weeks had passed since the showdown. The HOA board was undergoing audits, the signs had come down, and the threat to thunder had all but vanished. The community, still stunned by the shift, had begun to breathe easier. My morning rides had resumed, now met with nods, waves, and even a few shy smiles. But the last person I expected to see on our property that Sunday afternoon was Mrs. Walsh. She stood at the edge of our paddock, rigid in posture but holding the hand of a child, no more than 7, maybe 8. The little girl's face lit up when she spotted Thunder, who stood calmly under the shade of the old oak. "That's him!" the child exclaimed, tugging her grandmother's arm. "That's the famous horse from the video." Mrs. Walsh caught my eye, her expression uncertain. For a moment, I saw something unfamiliar in her face. Not defiance, not smugness. Something quieter. Tiredness, maybe. Or regret. "This is my granddaughter," she said finally. "She's visiting for the weekend. She wanted to see the horse." I hesitated, memories of her insults still fresh, but the look in the girl's eyes washed that all away. "Would she like to pet him?" I asked gently. Mrs. Walsh blinked in surprise. She'd love that." Thunder lowered his head patiently as the child reached up, stroking his muzzle with awe. Her giggle, pure and innocent, cut through months of tension like sunlight through clouds. "He's softer than I imagined," she whispered. Mrs. Walsh watched closely, arms still crossed, but her stance began to ease. "She's been scared of animals for years," she admitted. "Bad experience at a petting zoo once, but she begged to come here after seeing your story." There was a pause. Then she said more quietly, "I suppose we've both been too stubborn." I looked at her carefully. "Mrs. Walsh, I ride because it connects me to my mom. I never meant to upset anyone." She nodded once. "And I never meant to become the villain of the neighborhood." Thunder snorted softly, nudging her elbow. She startled, then, hesitantly, reached out and patted his neck. The little girl beamed. "My name's Ellie," I said. She sighed. "Helen." That was the start. She didn't suddenly become a champion of horses or post an apology on Facebook. But that day she stayed longer than she needed to. She listened. She watched her granddaughter climb onto Thunder with my help, and for the first time in all our interactions, she smiled. Sometimes the loudest breakthroughs come not with shouts, but with stillness. And sometimes the fiercest enemies aren't defeated, they're softened. Some victories aren't about court rulings or social media applause. They're about quiet change, the kind you feel in the air when neighbors start waving again, and when old enemies look you in the eye and simply nod. This story began with a morning ride and a girl's bond with her horse. But what it really exposed was something much deeper: how fear, pride, and unchecked authority can corrode the very communities meant to protect us. The HOA's obsession with control, Mrs. Walsh's personal vendettas, and Mr. Perkins' power plays, they weren't just annoying. They revealed what happens when rules override compassion. But in the heart of all that noise, a few truths stood tall. First, know your rights. In a world filled with fine print, sometimes it takes courage to challenge what everyone else assumes is correct. City ordinances, old charters, and dusty records might seem boring, until they become the shield that guards your dignity. For many in the older generation, this message resonates. Your knowledge and experience aren't relics, they're resources. Second, stand firm, but stay kind. Throughout this fight, Ellie didn't stoop to anger. She showed her evidence, rode with pride, and met hostility with grace. That balance of strength and softness is something age teaches us well. It's not about yelling the loudest. It's about knowing when to speak and when to let others reveal their own character. Third, community matters. In the end, the neighborhood didn't change because of a lawsuit. It changed because people started listening, because one neighbor stepped in to say she has a right to speak, because a quiet dad ran for mayor, not for ambition, but for justice. That's what real community looks like. It's not perfect lawns or matching fences. It's people who show up for one another, even when it's hard. And finally, sometimes the best revenge is restoration. They tried to break Ellie's spirit. They ended up building the very legacy she and her father now protect. A neighborhood once known for restrictive rules now has riding trails. A girl once shamed for her horse now teaches local kids to ride. Even Mrs. Walsh, once the story's villain, has begun to thaw, one soft step at a time. So what's the lesson that lasts? It's that real power doesn't come from titles. It comes from truth, patience, and heart. That fighting back isn't always loud, it's strategic. That defending what's right might just inspire your neighbors to do the same. To every grandparent, every veteran HOA member, every retiree who's watched the world shift around them, this story is a reminder. You still have a voice, you still matter, and sometimes the strongest stand you can take is simply refusing to back down. Let the younger ones see what dignity looks like. Let them learn what legacy truly means. And let us never forget, the right to ride doesn't just belong to the young, it belongs to the brave.